Hi, it's Sam Cook. Welcome back to another episode of the Borderlands show. And today we're going to be talking about the military situation, specifically Russia's offensive. Is it stalled or reloading? And I'm here with Glen Grant, retired Lieutenant Colonel from the British Army, and David Sims, retired Lieutenant Colonel from the U.S. Army, and myself didn't retire but was a major before I got out, taught Russian and Ukrainian history, and now been in the technology field in Ukraine. So let me just kick this over straight to you, Glenn. A short answer on the question, stalled or reloading? How is the offensive going for Russia, and where do you characterize
I think it's a good question because I don't think it's one answer across the whole front. I think there are several areas where they're stalled, and there are several areas where they're reloading, and there are other areas where they're just moving forward, but slower than they would like to because of the logistics problem and just general problems. So I mean, I think that they want to reload. They want to, especially around Kiev, and they are. I give them their due. They are still moving forward to try and encircle Kiev. And this is exactly what the Ukrainian forces don't need is to for Kiev to be blocked off.
Got it. And Dave, short take from your side, and then we'll go into it.
Yeah, pretty similar view to what Glenn has, right? Russia, their progress is very slow because they're continuing to be constrained by their own capabilities. But we continue to see Russian progress, right? So I think it's very, very early, 2 weeks into this conflict, to say, somebody is winning. I always caution people to say somebody is winning a war, right? Even though it's an infinite game, and it's going to continue for some time.
Hey, Glenn, would you mind muting when you're not talking, because you're in a bit of a loud place? Just when you're not speaking, Glenn. Yeah. So, so Dave, what I wanted to ask both of you right now is, what's changed since we last had our conversation? We were talking about the core problems that Russia was having in terms of communication, logistics, and also problems with air power. What do you see that's changed in the last week since we had our last update? I think it was 4 or 5 days ago.
It was about 4 or 5 days ago. You continue to see Russia attempt to gain local air superiority, and they still can't gain even local air superiority. There's still parity in the skies over most of Ukraine. For very short durations, Russia can get air superiority, but as soon as their aircraft egress, it's back to air parity, if not Ukrainian air superiority. Another thing we're seeing is older and older Russian aircraft entering Ukrainian airspace. So, something I'd like to look into further is what's going on with that. I opined a few days ago that it's why use a Generation 4 or 5 airframe when you don't have Generation 4 and 5 munitions to fire from it. So is it that? Is it attrition of airframes that's forcing them to pull up older airframes to commit to the fight, or what combination, or what level of risk acceptance is Russia willing to accept in the skies? I think also Russia is starting to build a little bit of capability to move logistics forward, very slowly. But I've seen some reporting of Russia working to reconnect rails inside Ukraine to the Russian rail network. So there's some of that reporting on there. Russia's logistics for this was rail based, right? And that was, I think, a huge planning assumption that they had. That was they would have freedom of the railways to move logistics in. And if you overlay the major road networks, rail networks, and navigable rivers on top of each other in Ukraine, you'll see those overlap. Right, they're really close to one another. So that does give a Russian army that's kind of tied to the roads right now, and that's their span of control or major highways, and 100 meters either side of it, and putting that railway that's a couple hundred meters off of the major highway, it's going to give them an ability to conduct some kind of resupply. So I think that's what we're going to see. I don't think in the short term we're going to see reinforcement of Russian combat forces. We really haven't seen any indicators, reports inside of Russia of moving additional combat forces into position. I think Russia right now is trying to fix their logistics problem rather than commit additional combat power.
Glenn, why don't you weigh in on what has changed in the last 4 or 5 days since we spoke in terms of, has Russia lost momentum? Have they prepared to regain momentum by doing things that maybe we're not noticing?
I think the first thing is that they've started to use atrocities as their key thing. They're now actually deliberately targeting civilians everywhere they can. And even in the south, a couple of places that they went into, like Kherson, where they didn't actually manage to kill the civilians. At first, they've arrested a whole load of them, 400, and put them into prison. And in Mariupol, they're now just deliberately targeting anywhere that's got civilians in them, like schools, hospitals, shops, you name it. They're targeting it. And it looks as though their aim is just to terrorize the population in any way they can. And that's the biggest change from 4 or 5 days ago.
Glenn, what is the reason for that? Is it because President Putin has recognized, or the Russian command has recognized, that there's no political future for a client Ukrainian state, and they've just given up on the political settlement that they wanted? Obviously, at the beginning of the war, they behaved in a way they thought. I think Putin and the generals even believed their own propaganda that they'd be welcomed as liberators. Do you think this is just spite, or is there a strategic objective behind the terror that they can achieve some kind of military objective behind it?
Well, I think spite is a strategic objective in this case. I mean, I think just spite, sheer bloody nastiness, that, if we can't have this place, then no one will. And they're just going to destroy everything that they can. I mean, they're doing that as hard as they can in Kharkiv, Kiev, Sumy, you name it. They're destroying. And there's no military reason behind any of this. It's just malicious nastiness.
What are the military impacts of it for both Russia and Ukraine?
Well, the military impact for Ukraine is that, of course, it makes it harder for them to do operations if they've actually got a population around them that's dying and being killed. Well, it does make them a lot harder. Apparently, it's not softening the stance of Azov Battalion. And I saw something this evening that actually in Mariupol, I saw something this evening that it's the civilians that won't let Azov Battalion give in. That civilians are saying, we've taken this much, you keep fighting. It's a challenge in Kharkiv. I mean, I think that the attack on the on housing and everything in Kharkiv and Kiev is less effective than they might want, because lots of people have left already. There's been a good 500,000 from each disappeared. So that doesn't put a load onto the military. And I think that the military are learning now, or understanding, that they've got to go out and fight, that they can't fight from inside the city, because quite simply the Russians are not going to go into the city. I think on the part of the Russians, then they have grasped that they can't win if they go into the city. They're just going to be beaten by sheer force of numbers. They won't be able to go to sleep. I think that's probably the most easy way to put it. There'll be no sleep, because if they go to sleep, they'll be killed. And I'm sure that they've grasped that idea. But I mean, the big change in the next few days is going to be the weather, because around Kharkiv it's going to drop to between -12, -16, and that is going to have huge effects on the Russians.
Why the Russians versus Ukrainians? Both sides suffer the weather equally. Why would it hurt them more?
Well, because the Ukrainians can go back inside buildings and down into cellars and light fires down in a cellar. But if you're outside and you're a target, you're running your engine in -12 to keep warm. The fuel soon goes, or the batteries drain. If you don't run the fuel, you do it off the battery, and then the battery drains. And once the battery's dead, I mean, that's it. You just got a dead tank. And in -12, then a tank or an armored personnel carrier basically just becomes a refrigerator. And inside it's just you can't stay in there without heating. It just becomes unbearable. And they're not going to want to sit around in -12 anyway. They've either got to get inside their sleeping bag and wrap themselves up, or they've got to stand outside and jump up and down all night to keep warm.
So that 40-mile convoy that never seems to move is just going to become a big meat locker, I guess.
Well, actually, it has started to move. It's started to split up, and they've started to try and move some of it in different directions. And that actually could mean, as part of this sort of reset of what they want to do. But they're still going to have problems with it, with the weather. There's no question about that.
Yeah, I can jump on the weather. So I spent 3 years in Fairbanks, Alaska. 2 years as an infantry battalion executive officer and a year as a brigade executive officer, right? So I am like elbow deep in logistics in the Arctic, right? That's a problem set I understand. And everything gets more difficult below zero. All right. And when you get below 0 Fahrenheit, Celsius, it don't matter. They're pretty much the same once you get below 0, right? Until you get like -100. We're not going to get there. But everything stops working, right? Below 0, everything's degrading. You start to hit 20 below, things cease to function. Weapons cease to function. Metal starts to freeze, right? So if they're rifles, if the action on a rifle or a machine gun is not exercised, is not lubricated with an Arctic lubricant, those weapons platforms will seize. They will not function. Right? Radios, electronics act funny. Right? An Arctic environment is a natural electronic warfare that you're facing. Right? And Glenn's absolutely right. The Russians, while seemingly on the offense, but the pace is so slow, they're in a lot of defensive posture, which is grinding that to a halt. And sitting in a BTR 80, right, when it's 10, 15, 20 below, that is a meat locker, right? Right, because our rough equivalent's a striker, and I was in a striker brigade in Alaska, right? So, and to run your heater in there requires fuel, right? The heating systems is a drip fuel heating system. And that just compounds their log problem if they run heaters. So this is not, the weather turning south and getting colder is not a good situation for Russia.
And just Glenn, how long is this cold snap? I guess it's one of the cold snaps that comes, seems every March or so, or maybe there's one in early April too. But how long is this supposed to last?
Well, I looked earlier on today, and it was at least a week, and suggesting it might even be as much as 10 days.
Wow. Okay. So things might get slower, and those who are in armored vehicles outside of cities, which is mainly the Russians, are potentially going to have more logistical issues, weapons issues, fuel issues because of this. So that's something to look forward to, I guess, in terms of just a prediction. So maybe that tilts us toward a little bit more stalled than reloading. But Glenn, what can they do during this period to take advantage of potentially the cold weather? If anything, could the Russians start to rebuild their supply lines, even though the fighting tempo might slow down? Or
yes, I mean they can just resupply. I mean, there's no question about that. The big question is whether they can resupply to the volume that's required for such a large convoy in the northeast and everywhere else. I mean, remember they've got to resupply on about 6 or 7 different lines of attack at the moment. Not so much down on the old front line in Donbass, because they've been stocking that up for something like 3 years. So I suspect that there's enough down there now for a long time. But certainly all the people who came out of Crimea have got to be fed, watered, and above Donbass, there's 3 or 4 lines of attack there, and Russia will have to decide which ones are the most important. And I suspect they'll reinforce around Kiev because that's the big prize. I mean, what they can do is get out of their vehicles and start doing proper infantry work. But they just don't look like they're in the mood for doing that. And if you actually look at them, they do not look like proper infantry. I mean, the majority of people we've seen are seriously unfit. You can see that they're physically poor specimens. They're not hardened infantry. And if they start doing that, they're going to come up against Ukrainians who will just take them to pieces physically in the combat battle. So they're a bit stuck, actually, I think. But what they have got is just sheer force of numbers, and they might just try and use sheer force of numbers to break through where they can.
Yeah, it seems like armored vehicles, although the Ukrainian farmers are I think the 3rd largest army in the world now, and hopefully they're not charging the Ukrainian government too much to transfer that equipment. Boy, John Deere stock must be going crazy right now. Can you imagine the commercials that are going to come out of this war?
Who knew you could recover a tank with a John Deere tractor? We always used M88s, right, or another tank.
Yeah, so
Deere's so much cheaper.
Great marketing for John Deere. Well, what I want to do is our amazing show producers put together a video, and I'd like to show this in the middle of the show instead of the end of the show, because there's another one I'd like to put together, and I'd like you all to comment on it as we go. And first things first, let's start with President Zelensky's talk.
Нескорної країни. Вже 14-й день нашої оборони, нашого захисту. 14-й день нашого єднання. По-справжньому всеукраїнського. Масштаб загрози держави максимальний. Окупаційний контингент вже завів на нашу територію майже усіх, кого збирали для вторгнення в Україну. Але і масштаб нашої відповіді максимальний. І це два різних слова максимально. У них і у нас. У них тільки техніка по максимуму. У нас до техніки ще й наш народ. На висоті. У них тільки накази, наступи, вбивати, знущатися, а у нас ще реальне бажання мільйонів українців перемогти, захистити, очистити свою державу. І на оновленій землі врага не буде супостата, і буде син, і буде мати, і будуть люди на землі. Сьогодні день народження Тараса Шевченка. Це наша давня мрія, це його мрія. очистити землю. І вона жива і цілком реальна. Українці, українки, усе в наших руках. Ми вистояли і надихнули увесь світ нашою рішучістю. Немає такого куточка на землі, де б не знали, з яким героїзмом український народ захищає нашу прекрасну.
So just on the talk by President Zelensky, I think Glenn, my favorite analyst, I hope he sees this one of these days, Michael Kaufman, talks about the fact that the original sin of this campaign is that basically the Russian soldiers were lied to in terms of the nature of the campaign and their orders. It's become very clear that most of them had no idea they're going to Ukraine, and many of them were conscripts, were tricked into it or forced into it. And President Putin actually admitted as much, or let's say the Russian military admitted as much, that they're going to investigate who violated the great president's orders to not have conscripts going to Ukraine. So you have a bunch of conscripts in Ukraine, especially logistics soldiers, which are the most targeted soldiers. And their morale is devastated from the POW interviews and the number of desertions of equipment, perfectly good equipment, that has not been destroyed and hasn't run out of gas or ammunition. Whereas what President Zelensky is doing in that talk is, I think, rallying the nation that, from all accounts of soldiers I've spoken to, and Glenn, you've spoken to, the Ukrainians are certainly in a tough fight, but the morale seems to be sky high. What's your assessment, Glenn, speaking to people in the Ukrainian army, of the morale versus the Russians?
Well, I don't think there's any comparison. I mean, the morale of the soldiers is extreme, to the point where they're all saying that, you know, we're not getting in until this is over, and that Russia has got to be beaten, that Putin has got to be beaten, and Ukraine has got to be free. And I've hardly met anybody that isn't of that mind. I mean, there are one or two people I know who I'm going to say sort of more the more arty types, who are the softer people who are finding it very hard. And of course that's not a surprise, because war really is hard. If you're kicked out of your home and you end up in Poland or somewhere like that, then it's cruel. But the general feeling, the general thing that I get is that people are saying we are going to keep going on this until the end, and there will be no surrender, because there's been too much death now over the ages leading up to this last attack and during this attack itself. But I mean, obviously on the Russian side, the morale is nothing like that. I mean, it's much less. They're fighting for something they don't understand, because they've come in to fight, and what do they find? They find that the very people they thought were going to throw flowers at them are actually trying to kill them. So
not just the soldiers, but all of the civilians are protesting them furiously, wrapped in that flag that everyone told them. And
that, you know, that these people who wanted to come back to Mother Russia don't want to come back at all.
Yeah. Well, one of the soldiers I know, he was serving outside of Kharkiv today, and he said, "I've been wounded lightly yesterday. I'm comparatively okay. Got shell shock and multiple bruises, but armor plate and helmet saved my life. I literally saw white light yesterday. Had the strange feeling after the explosion. First, for a couple seconds, you only see white light and no sound. There's a time to think that it's all over. And after that, you start to see the surrounding things, and there's whistling sound in the ears, but you can't move your body, can't feel anything for some time. After that, when you try moving hands and realize that you still have them on place and working is really inspiring. Then when you see your legs and can try crawling out of the location before the next strike, that is the biggest moment of joy. Even seeing blood dropping from my head on the eyes can't spoil this. Awful moments, but inspiring. Wish you had never experience it, but knowing that you're alive again after saying goodbye to yourself feels great. I'm in the hospital now. They used Orlan 10 drone to target howitzer fire. We don't have any means to shoot it down because ordinary gunfire can't hit these drones. only sophisticated anti-aircraft rocket systems. Ukraine doesn't have enough of them. I'm the illustration we need to close the airspace over Ukraine. This guy is going to go back to his unit in the next 5 or 6 days. Yeah, I saw the picture. He is a bit banged up, bruised, bloodied, but just from that note, and I said, how's the morale of the troops? He said, sky high, and we're going to kill all the Russians. So definitely President Zelensky, you know, Glenn, we talked about this, I think the third day of the invasion or fourth day, you know, when he stayed and then starts making all these speeches, that changed everything. So definitely seeing the impact of that on the front lines.
I mean, what has been interesting for me is the, I'm going to say the few casualties that have been mentioned in things like Facebook, the few Ukrainian casualties. And I expected to see much more. And I don't think it's because nobody wants to talk about it, because we always do talk about people that have died. It's part of the Ukrainian psyche to actually to celebrate the death, you might say, of a friend, and to say how bad it is. And I think the fact is that they're just actually, in death terms, they're actually just losing so many fewer than the Russians at this stage of the battle. I mean, there are, and I know it sounds terrible to say something like this, but I mean, I think even the number of deaths of the civilians has been low. I mean, it could have been just so much worse than it has been. And there's just been, you know, combination of luck, combination of people leaving and getting out before the worst hit. But even in Mariupol, the numbers are bad, but they're just not as bad as similar sorts of things in the Second World War, for example. Which makes me think that you know, either the Russians are not using as effective weapons, so they're still using sort of the old iron bomb type weapons, or you know, Ukraine is just getting an amazing stroke of luck. And let's just hope that whatever it is, it continues, and that the numbers of dead stay as low as possible.
I think American intelligence did assess, at least in the first few days of the war, that there might have been comparable deaths on each side. But you're right, Glenn. We're not seeing. There are plenty of death announcements, and it's not like I think the Ukrainians are hiding it. Although they have been very cagey on not publishing any official numbers. I haven't seen any from the Ukrainian side, but they certainly seem to be much more economical with their deaths compared to the Russians, and that's to be expected when you're mainly defending as well as they are. I've not heard one military analyst criticize much on the Ukrainian side in terms of their execution of their defensive strategy and tactics. They've all generally praised it to the point where you start to wonder, well, what did they do wrong? I know down south, the unit that was down south was actually on exercises and got caught on exercises near Crimea, unaware of the pending invasion. But it seems like even they've recovered and rallied around Nikolaev and formed a solid defensive line in the south, preventing them from pushing on Odessa.
Yeah, I mean, I think that Crimea debacle will need some serious looking at after the war, because Crimea could have been closed off for 2 weeks without anybody breaking out. It's such a narrow barrier, and there is no way, in my view, that any troops should have got out of Crimea at all. And there's, you know, that was a serious strategic mistake, which I hope doesn't come back and bite them later.
Well, you know, Glenn, we talked about this last time. The Ukrainians did not believe Russia was going to invade, and that much is becoming clear as a bluff, as Zelensky was saying. And Glenn, I think we had a lot of spies inside the Russian army, and they were just, the Russian leadership was telling their soldiers, it's an exercise, And then when the orders get issued 2 days before the invasion, you started to see President Zelensky and everyone change their tune in terms of their risk calculus and their messaging to the people. But it certainly Ukrainians as much as it surprised the Russian soldiers.
Yeah, well, it clearly did. I mean, it beggars belief for me that people, though, can make that sort of mistake, because when you've got half the world telling you it's going to happen, it's a very strange thing to ignore the intelligence services of several of the world's most active countries in terms of things like that.
Yeah, no, I think so. And Glenn, let's move on to the next one here. The Belarusian army famously has not entered the conflict. Rumors of the chief of staff resigning and mutiny within the ranks preventing the movement, as well as political reluctance by Lukashenko to not back what obviously seems to be a losing campaign now, and then sabotage among the Belarusian population of the railroad, which is probably affecting not just their own troop movements, but Russian logistics. But this is some interesting news about the Belarusian fighters on the Ukrainian side, and this is just one of their own propaganda videos.
Можливий рост у наших шерегах дозволяє нам сказати сьогодні всім білорусам, що ми формуємо особливий білоруський батальйон ім'я Костуся Каліновського. Всі бойові групи, де є білоруси, виказали згоду приєднатися до формування батальйону. Білоруси готові обороняти Київ. Ми чекаємо на вас. Весь час проводимо навчання.
I'm getting double counting on the videos, like two videos running at the same time.
Really? Sorry about that.
Yeah, could you stop it?
Розмобілізаційний центр у Варшаві. Живе Білорусь! Живе Білорусь!
That's better.
So President Putin says his project of restoring the Soviet Union is progressing well, as the ruble is worthless and you can't get out of the country. And I think that definitely matches with what we talked about in the economics the other day. So I'm going to get into some maps later, because we've got some that I'll bring in here. But it seems like the Russian strategic goals, expanding the encirclement of Kiev, setting the stage for the offensive on Odessa, seizing Mariupol, and convincing local officials in towns that they've surrounded to surrender or to face devastating siege tactics. And that's what Marco Rubio, U.S. Senator, is saying is the main focus of the Russian army. Glenn, do you agree with that assessment in terms of Russia's major goals right now?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, I think they're having to do atrocities, if you want to call it that, for the simple reason that they're losing otherwise. That they're not convincing the local population at all that you know that they come to save them from the Nazis. And when they're going into town, the local populations are just lining up in front of them in thousands, as they did in Kherson, and just saying, "Go away, go away, go away, go home," sort of thing. So the only way is for them to start killing people. But I don't think that is going to work. He's just going to kill people and trash the towns, but it's not actually get them their strategic aim. Sooner or later, they're going to have to move on, because they can't. There are just not going to be enough of them to stay and hold all these towns.
Yeah. Dave, anything you want to add on these objectives?
I don't think these objectives have changed since, D-14. Like these are objectives that they've had pre-invasion, pre-identified. It's just adjusting progress and adjusting expectations and resources, I think, is what changed, right? And Marco Rubio is on the Senate subcommittee, select committee for intelligence, and the committee for foreign relations. So, his assignments within the U.S. Senate kind of let him have a little bit of a finger on the pulse of a lot of these, and obviously access to more classified information than what we get right now is a bunch of former retired military officers. But I don't think this has changed. I think number 2 and 3 are related because Mariupol sets conditions for Odessa. Eventually, that's completing that in the south, and attempting an expand and encirclement of Kyiv. Right, that's something that we've seen, with how they had forces arrayed and staged pre-invasion. So nothing surprising here. I don't think it's really a significant adjustment.
Okay, and just moving on here, says people in Crimea, FSB is actively putting homes for sale. Mostly families of FSB and the Occupation Administration. Glenn, do you really think that they believe that Crimea might now be at risk in a pending collapse of the Russian state? I know Michael Kaufman, the Russian analyst that I really like and follow, is saying that he believes Putin's days are numbered. The regime's days are numbered based on the missteps. He thinks it's very hard for the regime to recover from the betrayal of the country and the army in terms of the absolutely ridiculous assumptions that they made that's led to this disaster in terms of the morale among the soldiers and the country in terms of the conscripts. And, they're stuck in a trap where Putin's now promising not to mobilize, but he certainly doesn't have the ability to go the distance without mobilizing. So he may have to covertly mobilize.
Well, he apparently started mobilizing in the Rostock area, which is something. The big thing about Crimea, I mean, if these people are moving, then it means that they know the game's up. And I saw one writer sort of saying that it will be relatively quite easy to get Donbass, but very hard to take Crimea. I think it's the other way around, because in Donbass, most of the people who are fighting actually live there, and so they some of them have staked the whole of their work life on the last 8 years of war and fighting against Ukraine. But in Crimea, nobody's got a stake in Crimea that they haven't bought. It's not like any of these FSB and their wives and rich people actually come from there. They've just bought their way in there. And if they think that Ukraine is coming back, I think they'll be running over that bridge as fast as they can all go. I think if Ukraine can get a brigade onto the entrance of Crimea, I would say watch this space to see who can run the fastest.
Well, that's definitely a fascinating prediction and something that I wouldn't have thought would have been in the cards. And it certainly seems from the negotiating position of the Russians, which seems to be quite weak compared to their demands. Have all of a sudden they've dropped the denazification, which is just code for regime change, which they obviously understand won't happen. Even if they manage to kill Zelensky, they're not going to politically rule the country. Well, I know my friends that have property in Crimea will be happy, my Ukrainian friends who are hoping to finally recover their land.
So the way that the Ukrainians are acting and talking to me, I mean, I think they just can't wait to be let off the leash to start actually going and doing these things. I mean, they may be a bit weak at the moment, but I mean, they've had mobilization. And that means there's another best part of 1 million people now coming under arms in Ukraine. And, with that many, sooner or later, they're going to want to doing something with them, not just sitting in Kiev.
Well, there are also people are paying bribes to get into the army and even the territorial defense. So it's certainly the opposite of the Russian problem, where they're trying to hide mobilization. And That's just the intangibles of morale and spirit of a country at war.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's an amazing spirit, and it's something that Russia couldn't have predicted. And I just don't think when I watch and look at what the the things coming out of the Pentagon and out of White House and things, I just don't think they've grasped yet what is actually happening culturally and militarily.
No, I think the Americans and Europeans are still predicting that Russians will probably fail on the battlefield just because of sheer force of numbers and equipment and what we're saying from just our conversations with people we know inside the Ukrainian military is morale is that intangible you can't really measure and predict. That's the hardest thing for anyone in intelligence to assess, and I think they're missing that story.
Yeah, I would agree completely, actually, and it's because it's culturally difficult for people to understand that, because I'm going to say cruelly, in many ways we've lost it. I mean, okay, the SEALs and people have still got that hardness of fighting, but your average population, your average man in the population in most Western countries hasn't. They've lost it. They don't have that thinking at all. I mean, I just can't imagine Dutchmen or Belgians all rallying together to fight for their country. They're far more likely to go and buy some tulips and hand them over.
Well, or imagine a Western leader staying in the capital when it's under siege, which I don't imagine their Secret Service would even let them do that.
That's a good point, actually.
President Zelensky's survived 10 assassination attempts that they estimate now.
Wow. So, Sam, what you're talking about is, and what we're hitting around here is, we talk about is the difference between the science and the art, right? The science is what the Pentagon is using. Is they have the force ratio calculators out, right? And we're plugging T-72s and BMP-3s and BTR-80s and BMDs and X number of 2S-19s and BM-21s and what have you. And it's a calculation. It's a simulation. It pops out a solution at the end that says somebody's going to win this conflict based on this relative combat power calculation that we have all these wonderful systems for, which is great. And it provides us a baseline to understand the geometry and the effects on the battlefield. But the art is commanders calculating the morale. And that's commander business. And that's, what we see when we see a leader like Zelensky, who, bless him. I don't think anyone anticipated the leadership that he would demonstrate from his position and the trickle down effect it has, not just in Ukraine, but around the world. It's mobilizing people across this planet to be like, I want to pick up a rifle and follow this man. He has charisma. He has authentic leadership. He has transformational leadership abilities and capabilities. And we see that. And I believe in the man, right? Like that's the art. That's something I can't put into a combat power, relative combat power force ratio calculator and provide a solution for.
I would add to that. I mean, I think you're absolutely right. And the bit I would say is that also that none of the international
Dave, one of the interesting things I saw this week was two old friends of mine from the military, U.S. military, who retired, have decided to come over to Ukraine. And when one of them told me he's coming to Ukraine, I won't say who, I knew that Russia's lost because this guy's absolutely insane. And I won't say who, but he knows who he is if he's watching. And then another one called me, who also brave rifles, I'll say no more, is on his way this weekend. And it's just then they have a whole battalion's worth of Canadians who are over, and Canada has a very strong connection to Ukraine. I think it's because they're both really cold countries, and Ukrainians just decide to move to cold countries, even though they could go to a warm spot. And 40,000 foreign volunteers in the International Legion, and people are calling off the hook. The voicemail box is full. People are screaming about, customer service is a little bit slow. So they're being overwhelmed. You have people paying bribes to join the Ukrainian army and the territorial defense. And it's just going to become a manpower advantage very, very quickly.
Yeah.
Over the Russians who have equipment that they obviously don't know how to maintain and is rapidly getting captured. And the balance of equipment inside Ukraine is, Russian army, Ukrainian farmers, and then Ukrainian army. And there's a whole cross leveling of all this equipment. So yeah, the intangibles of Zelensky, leadership, the belief, the morale, I don't think that's getting picked up in the news media yet and by the intelligence analysts.
It's motivating some real pipe hitters, right? The guys going over there, these aren't JV guys coming over to Ukraine who are wanting to get involved in this. These are good people. So that's really the problem I think Ukraine will have with this influx of quality people, right, is the problem of catastrophic success. And you're seeing the issues you have with catastrophic success of throughput of organizing, equipping, assigning, and ultimately supplying these forces. That's going to be the issues Ukraine will have.
Well, and integrating them after the war into Ukrainian society, because they'll not want to go home. So that's a whole other thing. So I want to play something. I want to play something here that, Glenn, we've talked about the fact that the Russians have no OPSEC, no secure communications working. In fact, there was a general, Gerasimov, I think it's the nephew of the chief of staff of the Russian army, who was killed. And the reason why we understood that he was killed, this major general, deputy army commander, was because they called back on a civilian cell phone, which the Ukrainian intelligence intercepted. And I want to play a bunch of intercepts that Ukrainian military put together. And whether or not these are real or not, the impact is profound when you listen to this clip, just as an example of information warfare. And when I listen to these, and I don't even speak Russian well enough to understand it, but just when I read the subtitles, this makes my hair stand up and makes you want to go join the International Legion yourself. And I wanted to get both of you as we sit there. These are intercepted phone calls between Russian army soldiers and their wives, girlfriends, family back home.
Радиорит ездил.
Куда ездил?
Радиорит ездил.
Нихуя надо, маленько пополнить, блядь.
Ты? Хули делать? Стреляй на срать, блядь, чтоб не в тебя, ебать их урод, блядь, теперь. Считай, что наркоманы и нацисты, ебаные. Куда?
Мародерить. Это же поселок Верховной Рады.
Так.
Теперь у тебя есть два норковых манто. У Даши есть этот самый муконовый полушубок с песком.
Дом один взяли. Какой контроль? Нас, блядь, 20 человек в одном доме.
Коньяк сбил за 7 тысяч.
Какого не будет?
Не будет? Охуеть, ебать. Ну ладно, привезу хотя бы гелик за 70 тысяч.
Он большой? А вам разрешат меньше нести? Почему разрешают?
А еще у меня есть метадовский станок, о котором я мечтал давно, пильный. И две ямаховские колонки, как унизительно, каждая, которая по существует. Сварочник новый, ящик, там, блесторубка на дачу новая.
Это только ты собрал все это?
Ну, с князем ездил вчера вдвоем.
Вчера у нас вот тоже, короче, просто какие-то три типа вышли прямо на нас. Мы их задержали, раздели догола, смотрели всю одежду. Ну и потом принимаете решение, отпускать их или нет, потому что если их отпустить, они могут наши позиции сдать. И тогда нас всех решает артиллерия. Ну и приняли решение просто выжили.
Сереж, чтобы потом не говорили, что ты там это...
Ну, это решение будем взял на плату.
Ого, это мне надо.
Я говорю, что если не собой, это я не знаю, вы выиграли, это один из
So interesting and disturbing, especially if that's authentic, which we have no reason to believe it's not, but an amazing piece of information warfare on the Ukrainian side to put that out that quickly, and can certainly sway public opinion. Murder, theft, looting, rape, you name it, all in one video. Glenn, what are your thoughts as you listen to and see that? And what impact do you think that has on the Ukrainian and allied motivation when they see that?
Well, I mean, I think if you look from the
You're
Ukrainian
muted,
side, I mean, sorry, can you hear me?
Still muted.
Yeah. How about now? No.
Dave, can you hear me?
Yeah, I got you, Sam. I can hear Glenn as well. So
I don't know why.
On your end.
I'm sorry, Glenn. Go ahead.
Can you hear me now, Dave?
Yeah, I have you, Glenn.
Go ahead, Glenn. You can hear Dave.
Okay.
That's fine.
I mean, the big thing I think is that you know, the Ukrainians already know this, so I don't think it's going to make much difference to them. But what is significant is if this can be got back into Russia, because this is the sort of thing. I mean, most of the Russians simply don't believe at all that anything bad is going on. I mean, there's an awful lot of them don't even believe there is a war, or that, you know, if there is a war, it's a just war and Putin's doing the right thing. So, you know, if it can be got across to them that you know, rape and murder are taking place in their name, then it could have an effect on lots of things.
And we got some connection issues as well. So yourself, because the restream just notified me. You got some buffering on somebody's end out there. But yeah,
Dave, what were your thoughts on that?
There's no reason to believe that's not real. And perception, and the information operations domain, perception is reality, right? And in the modern era of social media, that what you just saw, what you just read, what you just heard, is going to be accepted as reality. Right. So this is incredible. This is incredible that, you know, we talked this over a week ago, Sam, that, you know, Russian military units are operating their radios in the green, right, unencrypted. Russia knows, well, at least, you know, operational strategic level leadership knows that intercepting cell phone signals is incredibly simple. That's easy. And you would assume, you know, in the United States and in the West, like we know anything I say over my phone can be heard by anybody, right? The United States, we got this thing called the Patriot Act that lets people listen in on my phone if they want. So it's incredible that there are admissions of crimes that will land you at the end of a rope. It will land leaders in The Hague. Operational and strategic level Russian leaders, it will land them in a war crimes trial. These are war crimes, and the other thing is, looting, murder, rape does not achieve military, tactical, operational, and strategic objectives. It is counter to achieving your military purpose. You justifying your your invasion of Ukraine is blown out of the water when your soldiers are committing war crimes.
Yeah.
You can't.
Absolutely.
You have no moral, stance, and high ground that's come from when your soldiers are committing war crimes. The discipline in Russian units is gone. It's kaput, right? And continuing to justify the special military operation is going to become increasingly more difficult, right? Russian leadership are experts at lying to themselves and believing their own lies. So they'll continue, but to the international community, right? It's just reinforcing that this is a complete sham.
Yeah. Yeah. Glenn, are you back? Were you able to?
Can you hear me all right? Can you hear me, Dave?
Yeah, go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yep, got you, Glenn.
I mean, what David says is absolutely true. But I mean, it shows this other thing as well, which is that the leadership of the Russian forces is completely broken. I mean, either they have no control over their soldiers and what their soldiers are doing, or they do have control over their soldiers and what their soldiers are doing, in which case that is simply a war crime by them, and is not something that any leader should be condoning or doing or even thinking of doing in his worst dreams. So it shows that they've got no moral compass in the armed forces at all. And an organization with no moral compass cannot beat an organization that wants to win. That is on a based upon values. It just can't do it.
Dave, for some reason I can't hear Glenn, but you can, which is awesome. So I'm going to let you host this thing going forward. I've got some maps up here, Dave, if you want to flick through them, but I can't literally hear Glenn, but you seem to be able to. So, Dave, have you seen this guy, Jomini, on Twitter yet?
Not until you shared him with me. But as you well know, Sam, I'm a Jomanite myself.
Okay. Well, anyone who wants to see probably the best daily roll-up on Twitter, if I were to only read one, it would be this man's thread and his maps. He must be in some kind of intelligence unit because he has probably the most detailed maps I've seen. But Dave, do you want to talk about with Glenn each one of the theaters in here and using the maps? I'm happy to let you do that because I can't hear Glenn, but you can.
Dave, can you hear me? Can you hear me now?
I have you fine, Glenn. Did you hear Sam?
Yeah, I can hear Sam fine. It's just I can't stay on much longer because I've got to go and do something else. I've got another. I'm due to have another interview soon with BBC, so I'll need to bail out. But I've looked at the maps and I looked at them. I mean, I absolutely agree with Sam. I mean, the detail is terrific. The only thing is he seems to have got the weather wrong. So I'm not sure which weather forecast he was looking at because he actually said that it's not going to be too bad. But I mean, it is. It is, and it is already tonight. So that would be my main comment. But he pretty much puts his finger on each of the areas and gets it, and he gets what's happened right. I'm not sure about his assessment of what is going to happen. But only days will tell with that.
Yeah, and I've seen some conflicting weather reports as well. So I've seen a couple sites, but Ukraine's it's a country, right? So the weather can be different in Lviv than it's going to be in Kharkiv, right? So as we get further east and northeast, the weather over the next several days is going to take a turn south. For certain. So you can just look at the Weather Channel, and it'll give you a good indicator. And then there's some other sites that show a little bit better weather over the next couple of days. But yeah, I'm with you on that on the read of this too, Glenn. I think this is pretty accurate. I like the maps. He spent a lot of time, or he has a staff of people, of intelligence analysts.
I
who have
agree.
a lot of time. This is not a single person making this product. This is a team building this, who has access to some systems that are providing this information to them. All right, specifically because there are Polish units identified on here as well as American units. So if you look on that map and you look in Romania, those are American units down there. So
yeah,
this
I'll have a taste around, see if I can find out who he is next couple of days.
It's Germany. It's the ghost of Germany. So it's somebody who's inside NATO or potentially fifth U.S. Corps, who's putting this together, because this is pretty darn good.
Quite.
Dave, one of the things. Go ahead, Glenn.
I was going to say I need to bail out. I need to go now because it's coming up to the top of the hour. So thank you for having me again, and I'll be here for hopefully for the next one when you're 3-4 days time, and let's hope it's positive.
Right on.
Okay,
thank you, boys, and I will see you both
Dave,
soon.
one of the things that amazes me about the overall picture here is the advantages Ukraine has with interior lines of communication and supply, and how they've managed to trade time for space across the whole country, given where they can afford to give and let's say held where they need to hold. And I was surprised looking at these maps at the coherence of the defensive sector, as strained as it may be in certain places. And, the big, I think, exception to this, and as he goes through each one of the theaters, is he gives an assessment of Kiev. And on this map, key takeaway, Ukrainian forces have been pushed into a tight defensive ring around Kiev. However, as indicative in today's unsuccessful attack on Irpin, Russian forces remain challenged to execute large-scale assaults. And he detailed map of the units around Kiev and the successes and the real struggles the Russian forces have had in trying to encircle Kiev.
Yeah, and it does demonstrate, 2 weeks of preparation, 2+ weeks of preparation in Kiev, right? That these units have been able to prepare a defense, right? And if we want to go, doctrinal on this, which is always fun, executing the 7 steps of engagement area development, right? Ukraine is doing an exceptional job at developing a deliberate defense of their national capital, right? And when 2+ weeks, with all of that combat power, you can build a very formidable defense, and the trick with that is also, outside of that deliberate defense, Ukraine has armor and mechanized units who are capable of the offense, right? Because the defense itself doesn't win, right? That's the offensive component that it will enable them to win, and they have that flexibility. Looking at how Germany here has forces arrayed, Ukraine has the capability to defend and conduct counterattack.
Yeah.
So that places Russian forces, with the losses, their stretched lines of communication, logistical issues, lack of air support, in a pretty tough situation. But I always have to caution everyone, nope, Ukraine's not winning right now. Russia's not winning, right? There are localized successes. You can win battles, engagements, but that's not winning a campaign. That's not necessarily winning a war, right? So, I always have to throw a caution out there too. Is a lot of things are looking very positive right here, through a set of maps for Ukraine.
Well, I think the main takeaway I see here, especially related to Kiev, is I don't believe the Russian forces have enough combat power that's actually operable from a mechanical perspective and from a manpower perspective. They estimate, the United States intelligence estimates 6,000 Russian killed. Ukrainians are saying over 12,000 killed. If you multiply 6,000 by 3 to get the wounded, that's another 18,000 that are potentially wounded out of an initial invasion force of 150 to 180,000. You're looking at 10+% of your soldiers who've been killed or wounded and captured. It could be a lot more than that. Vehicle breakdowns, vehicles destroyed, anywhere from 15 to 25%. They probably don't have enough forces to surround and isolate Kyiv from all the supply lines of things getting into the city, let alone go into the streets of Kyiv and fight through every single block. Probably the best the Russians can do with the combat power they have in Kyiv is surround it, struggle to seal it off from supplies, resupplies, and it becomes a long siege where there's a constant game of cat and mouse between supply runs, breakouts in and out of the siege, which is going to consume most of Russia's available battalion tactical groups. And Russia, to get their forces here, they still have to capture key road junctions that they can't bypass without being attacked, which is Chernihiv here in the northeast, and then Sumy, which is leading to this also, and then Kharkiv, which doesn't lead to Kyiv. They don't need to go through Kharkiv to get to Kyiv, but they certainly need to do it in order to seal off the Donbass. So I love the way Jomini explains each area. So this is the area assessment on the east around Sumy. And the importance of Sumy is the communication going towards Kyiv, because until they clear Sumy and capture it, which they're struggling to do, their supply lines are incredibly vulnerable towards attacks. And what the Ukrainians are doing is just having the discipline to apply a lot of their combat power towards attacking supply lines, because they know that that's going to keep Kyiv from being effectively isolated and cut off.
And the one thing Ukrainians have here is time is on their side.
Yeah.
Right. Exercise patience. And as well noted, like Russia's lines of communication are they're thin. They control sections of those highways for a period of time, and the trains, 100 to 200 meters either side of it. They don't control large expanses of area. They're not securing that entire line of communication, right? So from Sumy to their forces who are east of the capital, they don't own that.
They just rent it.
Right, they're renting it. Yeah, it's at least on really bad terms.
Yeah, it's unstable. It's like Airbnb or something. So
it's not even that good. You're gonna get a bad review on your Airbnb. So they're very vulnerable along that line from Kharkiv and into Kiev, from Sumy into Kiev. Even coming from the north and south towards the capital. Everything every inch of the terrain is consistently contested.
Mm-hmm.
And no one should think for a minute that Russia and Ukraine, those people, haven't paid attention to the past 20 years of human conflict that tells you contesting supply routes, main supply routes, alternate supply routes, is incredibly important to breaking an enemy's will.
Yeah. So this is the eastern sector, the Donbass, and Ukrainians have been able to maintain an effective line of defense and along the Donetsk River, and they've been able to recapture key critical towns, which Russians are struggling not only to take towns but to hold them, and they're able to basically execute an organized withdrawal as they need to protect their lines of communication. And everyone, I think, knows that the ultimate prize here is Kiev, but the forces in the east are definitely managing to hold off a very determined effort from both the Donetsk and Lugansk People's Republic, or whatever they call those people there. And those forces reinforced by Russian soldiers, and it seems to be very well. And these are where the best Ukrainian, most experienced units were at the beginning of the conflict. And just a little bit more detail on this. And again, I love these maps. It's like the command and staff maps in the Army, making all these staff officers jealous here. But you can see level of detail. And what's amazing is you have Ukrainian brigades holding off entire divisions and corps on this map. So they've really prepared their defense well and are doing what they need to do.
And what Russia calls a division, and Ukraine's military force structure has changed from the Soviet style force structure that they inherited immediately, following their independence in '91. Whereas Russia's has largely maintained that same force structure. So a Russian division is not equivalent to an American division in terms of combat power. Even in your relative combat power calculator crap, right? It's not. It's a brigade. A Russian division's a brigade. So we can fool ourselves by looking at icons on a map, and we see two X's above it, and we're like, oh yeah, that's a motorized rifle division. Is it really, or is it more equivalent to a brigade of BTR 80s? Yeah, that's really more what it is. When you look on the Ukrainian side and you look at the modernization of their army and their force structure, it more resembles a brigade as a brigade.
Well, they're trying to align with the Western.
Because they have to. If you want to become a member of NATO, you have to be NATO interoperable. So when you say brigade, it has to mean brigade. Mm-hmm. Battalion has to mean battalion, right? Where Russia doesn't adhere to that. They do their own thing, and this is what it gets them.
So this is the southern sector, and the key takeaway here is the Russian advance has basically stalled, and the main fighting right now is around Mykolaiv, where the mayor there is very famously sporting his colored socks, in contrast to Putin sitting formally at his massive table. There's some good memes going out there with the mayor of Mykolaiv, and spirited resistance there with the 57th Brigade that was pretty much ambushed on a training exercise by the Crimean Russian forces coming out of Crimea that night. They had a very tough fighting retreat, according to a New York Times article I was reading. But they've reconstituted, managed to cut off or to hold a good defensive line, and are protecting the northern approaches to Odessa, which is why you keep seeing Russian landing crafts get ready to land. It seems like they're going to land any day now, but the reason they haven't is they're probably waiting for that breakout on land towards Odessa, so that there's a double envelopment there, which isn't happening right now. So
conditions aren't being set on the ground to enable an amphib assault into Odessa. And I thought they would just go ahead and execute that very early on. And they haven't. They feigned it a few times, intentionally or unintentionally, right? That's a feint. But the other thing I see here is this is a bulge, right?
Yeah.
It's easy. This is relatively easy to cut off.
Yeah. Well, there's definitely probably the most dynamic maneuvers has been down in the south for sure, in terms of the commander down there seems to be a lot more innovative and coordinated in their movements than you're seeing in the north around Kiev and in the east, moving towards Kiev from Sumy and Kharkiv. All right. Well, listen, Dave, we lost Glenn, but just wanted to wrap up here with you. I like those maps. I think we'll use those again. And going forward, as we do this show, and I just wanted to remind everyone who's watching this. We are going to move to 3 nights a week now. We did every day for the first 14 days of the conflict minus day 1 because we're in a bit of shock. But we've gone 14 days straight. I think the tempo of things are slowing down a bit, where we want to do 1 night a week where we bring you, Dave and Glenn, or whoever. I'd like to get one of the frontline soldiers on, maybe the guy who's getting out of the hospital soon before he rejoins his unit, and get some people like Yuri and Territorial Defense on these, let's call it, battlefield update shows every week. We're going to do the human interest, the volunteer stories, the experience of everyone in Ukraine as we set up this Borderlands Foundation, which is now a registered nonprofit in the United States. We just got our company tax ID number, and we're setting up here also a nonprofit in Europe, which should be hopefully registered soon in Poland and for the European Union regulations. And, we are going to build, continuing to build this, movement to tell the story of this Ukrainian struggle against Russian invasion. I mean, let's call it what it is, even if the United Nations won't. And really just appreciate everyone who supported us so far. This has taken off and turned into something that I'm still getting calls from people I've known in the military almost 20 years later are reaching out because of just the group of people that are assembling here to tell the stories of this struggle, really for the future of Ukraine, Europe, and the West, and democracy versus the authoritarian model that's emerged in Russia and China. And I'm really just really enjoying getting to connect everyone and really humbled by the opportunity to participate in this, and really just appreciate everyone who's donated so far. The money that you donate, we're going to put together a financial plan and publish it for our nonprofit, is going towards refugee evacuation. I have a staff of Ukrainian refugees, all refugees who've left the country or still inside the country, displaced internally, that 24 hours a day help other Ukrainians get out of the country or get relief inside the country. We've also teamed up with organizations. Some corporations are considering donating significant amounts of medical equipment and life-saving equipment for the people inside Ukraine, and supplies, and medical equipment and humanitarian supplies. So we're also organizing a warehouse and a team to bring supplies into Ukraine, and really that's going to be the focus of the organization going forward. I'm going to be back in the United States in the next week and spend a couple months in the United States raising money for the foundation. So I'm really looking forward to seeing you, Dave. I'll come through the Ohio State campus, I'm sure, and try and organize a talk there. And anyone else who's watching this, if you want me to come by while I'm in the United States, I'll be spending a lot of time in California, Texas, New York, Florida. We'll be driving around the whole country. Myself, my fiance from Ukraine, who's never been to the States, and I'm really looking forward to that trip back. And speaking of which, that's her. So that's a great time to end the show. My fiance is back from her train trip to southern Poland and back. So really enjoyed the comments. Thank you, Dan, for your comments. Frederick, and it's great to connect with all of you. And please donate if you would like to the Borderlands Foundation, which we're just starting. If you want to support people affected by the conflict and help people inside and outside of Ukraine affected by it. So thanks for joining, Dave. Thank you, Glenn, for, as always, a spirited conversation, commentary, and amazing background that you had, Glenn, and we're looking forward to having you both back on the show. I know that everyone asks when you both will be back on, and it's great hearing a couple lieutenant colonels, lieutenant colonels talk it out. So thanks, everyone. I hope you enjoyed, and we'll see you on the next show. We're going to do Sunday nights, Tuesday nights, and Thursday nights going forward. and we'll put out notifications on social media and email if that changes, and we'll send out replays as always afterwards. So thanks again, and we'll see you next time.